The sound of sneakers hitting pavement echoed through the quiet neighborhood as 17-year-old Damon walked home from basketball practice. His varsity jacket hung loose over his shoulders, still damp with sweat from 2 hours of intense training. The gym bag slung across his back bounced with each step, filled with his gear and textbooks for tomorrow's classes. It was one of those perfect Tuesday evenings when the sun hung low in the sky, painting everything in golden light. Kids played in their front yards while parents sat on porches enjoying the cool breeze that finally broke the day's heat. Damon loved walking through his neighborhood at this time. It felt peaceful, like a place where everyone belonged. He had just finished his best practice of the season. Coach Johnson had pulled him aside to talk about his chances of getting a college scholarship. The conversation kept replaying in his head as he walked. His mom would be so proud when he told her the news. She had worked double shifts at the hospital for years to keep him in good schools and basketball camps. Damon turned onto Maple Street, the same route he had taken hundreds of times before. This was his neighborhood where he had grown up, where everyone knew his name. Mrs. Patterson waved from her garden, and he waved back with a smile. Mr. Rodriguez was washing his car in the driveway and gave him a friendly nod. Everything felt normal, until he noticed the police car slowly following behind him. At first, Damon didn't think much of it. Police cars drove through the neighborhood all the time. His own mother always said they were just doing their job, keeping everyone safe. But as he continued walking, the car stayed right behind him, matching his pace perfectly. A weird feeling started growing in his stomach. He had never been in trouble with the police before. His grades were good, he stayed out of trouble, and he respected his elders just like his mother taught him. Still, something about the way the car was following him made him nervous. Damon decided to test his suspicion. He crossed the street at the next corner, pretending to head toward the convenience store. The police car followed, making the same turn. His heart started beating faster. He crossed back to the original side of the street, and sure enough, the car followed again. Now he was definitely nervous. Damon pulled out his phone and thought about calling his mother, but she was probably still at work. He didn't want to worry her over nothing. Maybe the officers were just being extra careful because of some incident in the area. He decided to keep walking home and hope they would move on to patrol somewhere else, but the car didn't move on. Instead, it suddenly accelerated and pulled up beside him. Damon's stomach dropped as he heard the window roll down. "Hey kid, stop right there," called out a voice from inside the car. Damon stopped walking and turned toward the vehicle. 2 officers sat inside, both staring at him with serious expressions. The driver looked to be in his 40s with graying hair, while the passenger appeared younger, maybe in his late 20s. "Yes, sir," Damon replied, keeping his voice respectful like his mother had always taught him. "What are you doing walking around here?" the older officer asked, getting out of the car. The question confused Damon. He was just walking home from practice, something he did every day. "I'm heading home from basketball practice, sir. I live just a few blocks from here." The younger officer also stepped out of the car now, and both men approached him. Something about their body language made Damon feel trapped, even though he was standing on a public sidewalk where he had every right to be. "You live around here?" the older officer asked, sounding skeptical. "Where exactly?" Damon pointed in the direction of his house. "On Oak Street, sir. Just past the community center." "That's a pretty expensive neighborhood for someone like you," the younger officer commented, looking Damon up and down. The words stung, but Damon tried to stay calm. His mother had worked incredibly hard to afford their home. She deserved to live wherever she wanted, and so did he. "My mom works at the hospital. We've lived there for 8 years. What's in the bag?" the older officer demanded, stepping closer. "Just my basketball gear and some books for school," Damon answered truthfully. "Mind if we take a look?" Even though the question sounded polite, Damon could tell it wasn't really a request. The way both officers positioned themselves made it clear he didn't have much choice in the matter. He slowly slipped the bag off his shoulder and set it on the ground. The younger officer unzipped the bag and started pulling out Damon's things. Basketball shoes, a water bottle, his algebra textbook, a notebook filled with practice plays the coach had drawn up. Nothing suspicious or illegal, just the normal stuff any high school student would carry. Clean gear for someone coming from practice, the older officer observed with suspicion in his voice. Damon felt confused by the comment. I always bring a clean change of clothes, sir. My mom taught me to take care of my things. More neighbors were starting to notice the commotion. Damon could see people looking out their windows and a few stepping onto their porches. He felt embarrassed having everyone see him being questioned by police like he had done something wrong. The officers seemed to be taking their time, examining every item in his bag far longer than necessary. They whispered to each other in voices too low for Damon to hear. Their body language remained tense and suspicious even though they had found absolutely nothing concerning. "Where are you really coming from?" the younger officer asked again, as if Damon had been lying the first time. "Basketball practice at Lincoln High School." Damon repeated patiently. "Coach Johnson can verify that if you need him to." "Don't get smart with us, kid," the older officer warned. Damon wasn't trying to be smart. He was just answering their questions honestly and offering to provide proof of what he was saying. But somehow his respectful responses seemed to be making the officers more agitated rather than less. As the questioning continued, Damon began to realize this stop had nothing to do with anything he had done wrong. The officer's suspicions seemed to be based on nothing more than seeing a young black teenager walking through his own neighborhood. The thought made him angry, but he knew better than to show it. His mother had prepared him for situations like this, teaching him to stay calm and respectful no matter how unfair things became. The conversation was about to take a much more serious turn, and Damon had no idea just how dangerous this routine walk home was about to become. The tension in the air grew thicker as the two officers continued their questioning. Damon stood perfectly still, his hands visible at his sides just like his mother had taught him. He answered every question politely, even though they kept asking the same things over and over again. "I'm telling you the truth, officers," Damon said for what felt like the 10th time. "I go to Lincoln High School. I play on the varsity basketball team. I live on Oak Street with my mother. I can show you my student ID if that would help." The older officer, whose name tag read Reynolds, stepped closer to Damon. His face was red with frustration, and his voice was getting louder. "Stop acting like you're better than us, kid. We know your type." Damon felt his heart sink. What did that mean, his type? He was an honor roll student who had never been in trouble. He volunteered at the community center on weekends and helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. But apparently none of that mattered to these officers. "Sir, I'm not trying to act like anything," Damon replied carefully. "I'm just trying to get home to do my homework." The younger officer, whose badge said Martinez, laughed coldly. "Homework? Right. More likely you're dealing drugs or looking for houses to break into." The accusation hit Damon like a punch to the stomach. He had never done drugs in his life, let alone sold them. The idea of breaking into someone's home was completely foreign to him. These officers were painting him as a criminal based on absolutely nothing. "I would never do anything like that," Damon said, his voice shaking slightly despite his efforts to stay calm. "You can ask anyone in this neighborhood. They all know me." "Oh, we're sure they do," Officer Reynolds said with a sneer. "Probably all covering for you too, by now." More neighbors had come outside to see what was happening. Mrs. Chen from across the street was recording with her phone. Mr. Williams, who lived next door to the community center, was walking over with a concerned expression on his face. "Is everything okay here?" Mr. Williams called out. "Police business," Officer Martinez snapped at him. "Keep moving." Mr. Williams didn't move. "That's Damon. He's a good kid. His mother, Patricia, works at the hospital. They've been living here for years." "We didn't ask for a character reference," Officer Reynolds barked. "Go back inside before you make this worse for yourself." The threat in his voice was clear, and Mr. Williams reluctantly stepped back, though he continued watching from his yard. Damon felt grateful that his neighbors were speaking up for him, but also worried they might get in trouble for trying to help. "See how you're causing problems?" Officer Martinez said to Damon, "Getting the whole neighborhood riled up. That's exactly the kind of troublemaker behavior we're trying to prevent." Damon couldn't believe what he was hearing. He wasn't causing any problems. He was standing quietly, answering questions and being as respectful as possible. His neighbors were the ones speaking up because they knew this treatment was wrong. "I'm sorry if there's been a misunderstanding," Damon said. He's still trying to de-escalate the situation. "Maybe I should call my mother so she can come clear this up." "Don't you dare reach for that phone," Officer Reynolds commanded, his hand moving toward his belt. Damon immediately raised his hands higher. "I wasn't reaching for anything, sir." I was just suggesting that maybe if you spoke to my mother, she could verify everything I'm telling you. We don't need to verify anything with anybody, Officer Martinez said, stepping even closer. What we need is for you to stop lying to us and tell us what you're really doing out here. The circular questioning was making Damon dizzy. No matter how many times he told the truth, they kept insisting he was lying. He began to understand that nothing he said was going to satisfy these officers. They had already decided he was guilty of something, and they were determined to find a way to justify their suspicion. Please, officers, Damon tried one more time. I can prove everything I'm telling you. My student ID is in my wallet. My house key has my address on the tag. You can call the school and verify I was at practice today. Stop trying to tell us how to do our job, Officer Reynolds snapped. The officer's patience had completely run out. In his mind, this teenager was being disrespectful by continuing to maintain his innocence and offer reasonable solutions. The fact that Damon spoke well and knew his rights only made the officer more angry. You think you're smart, don't you? Officer Reynolds said, his voice dripping with contempt. Think you can talk your way out of this with your fancy words and polite attitude? Damon was completely confused. Being polite and articulate were good things, weren't they? His mother had always stressed the importance of speaking properly and treating others with respect. Now he was being punished for the very qualities she had worked so hard to instill in him. I'm just trying to be respectful, sir, Damon said quietly. Respectful? Officer Martinez laughed harshly. More like manipulative. We see right through your act. The situation was spiraling completely out of control. What had started as a simple walk home had turned into a nightmare, where being polite was somehow evidence of criminal behavior. Damon felt trapped and helpless, unable to say or do anything that would convince these officers to treat him fairly. Turn around and put your hands against that wall, Officer Reynolds ordered, pointing to the brick wall of the community center. But I haven't done anything wrong, Damon protested weakly. That's for us to decide. Now turn around before this gets worse for you. Damon had no choice but to comply. He turned and placed his palms against the rough brick wall, feeling humiliated as his neighbors watched from their yards. Officer Martinez began searching his pockets while Officer Reynolds kept watch. Clean pockets too, Martinez muttered, sounding almost disappointed that he hadn't found anything illegal. The lack of any evidence should have ended the encounter, but instead it seemed to make both officers more determined to find something wrong. They were too invested in their suspicions to admit they had made a mistake. Maybe you're just better at hiding things than most punks we deal with, Officer Reynolds suggested. That's when Damon made the mistake of defending himself. I'm not a punk, sir. I'm a student and an athlete. I work hard and stay out of trouble. The words were barely out of his mouth when he felt the sharp sting of Officer Reynolds' hand across his face. The slap echoed off the brick buildings, causing several neighbors to gasp in shock. Damon's cheek burned with pain and humiliation. He had never been struck by an adult before, not even as punishment for actual misbehavior. The assault was so unexpected and undeserved that he almost couldn't process what had just happened. That's for having a smart mouth, Officer Reynolds said coldly. Damon fought back tears as he remained pressed against the wall. Every instinct told him to defend himself, but he knew that any physical response would be used as justification for even worse treatment. He had to stay calm and hope that someone would intervene before things got even more out of hand. Unfortunately, the situation was about to escalate in ways that would change everything for everyone involved. 3 blocks away, Sergeant Patricia Johnson was driving home from another long day at Fort Braxton. Her olive green Army combat uniform was crisp despite the 12-hour shift she had just completed. As a logistics coordinator, she had spent the day managing supply chains and training newer soldiers in inventory management systems. Patricia loved her job and took pride in serving her country, but her favorite part of every day was coming home to see her son. Damon was everything to her. The reason she worked so hard and stayed disciplined. She had raised him as a single mother since he was 3 years old, instilling in him the same values of respect, hard work, and integrity that the Army had reinforced in her. As she turned onto Maple Street, something immediately caught her attention. There was a crowd of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, all looking in the same direction with concerned expressions. Mrs. Chen was holding up her phone, clearly recording something. Mr. Williams was pacing back and forth, shaking his head and talking animatedly to Mrs. Patterson. Patricia slowed her vehicle to see what was causing such a commotion. Her blood ran cold when she spotted the familiar varsity jacket pressed against the brick wall of the community center. Even from behind, she knew that tall, lean frame belonged to her son. Two police officers stood near Damon, one of them appearing agitated while the other searched through his belongings scattered on the ground. Patricia could see the bright red mark across her son's left cheek, and a rage unlike anything she had ever felt began building in her chest. She pulled her car to the curb and turned off the engine with deliberate calm. Years of military training had taught her to control her emotions in crisis situations. But this was different. This was her child being mistreated by people who were supposed to protect and serve the community. Patricia stepped out of her vehicle, her combat boots hitting the pavement with authority. The neighbors immediately noticed her arrival, and several moved toward her with relief evident on their faces. "Patricia, thank goodness you're here," Mrs. Chen said quickly. "They've been questioning Damon for 20 minutes. One of them slapped him across the face for no reason." The confirmation of what Patricia could already see sent another wave of fury through her system. Her son had been assaulted by a police officer while simply walking home from basketball practice. Every protective instinct she possessed as both a mother and a soldier was screaming for action. "How long has this been going on?" Patricia asked, her voice steady but dangerous. "At least half an hour," Mr. Williams replied. "They stopped him for walking down the street. Damon's been nothing but polite and respectful, but they keep treating him like he's some kind of criminal." Patricia approached the scene with the measured stride of someone accustomed to command. Her military bearing was unmistakable, from her perfect posture to the confident way she carried herself. Years of leading soldiers in challenging situations had given her a presence that commanded respect, whether in uniform or not. "Excuse me, officers," Patricia called out in a clear, authoritative voice. Both policemen turned toward her, clearly annoyed by another interruption. Officer Reynolds looked her up and down, taking in the military uniform but apparently not grasping its significance. "This is police business, lady," he said dismissively. "Keep moving." "That's my son you have pressed against that wall," Patricia replied calmly. "And I'd like to know why he has a handprint on his face." Officer Martinez stepped forward, trying to intimidate her with his presence. "Your son was being disrespectful and giving us attitude. Sometimes kids need to learn lessons about proper behavior." Patricia felt her jaw clench, but her voice remained controlled. "My son has never been disrespectful to an adult in his life. I raised him better than that. What exactly did he do to warrant being struck?" "He was mouthing off," Officer Reynolds lied easily, "acting like he was too good to answer our questions. Is that right?" Patricia asked, looking directly at Damon, who was still facing the wall with his hands pressed against the brick. "No, ma'am," Damon said quietly. "I answered all their questions politely. I told them I was coming home from basketball practice and offered to show them my student ID to prove it." Patricia had heard enough. She knew her son well enough to recognize truth when she heard it, and everything the neighbors had told her confirmed her suspicions. These officers had profiled Damon based on nothing more than his appearance, and then escalated the situation when he failed to fit their preconceived notions of how he should behave. "Officers, I'm going to need you to explain your justification for detaining my son," Patricia said, her military training evident in her tone. "What crime do you suspect him of committing?" "We don't need to explain anything to you," Officer Reynolds snapped. "Now back off before you make things worse for yourself and your kid." The threat was clear, but Patricia had faced down much more dangerous people than two small-town police officers. She had served 2 tours in combat zones, managed logistics under enemy fire, and earned the respect of hardened soldiers through competence and courage. These men had no idea who they were dealing with. "Actually, you do need to explain," Patricia corrected him. "You've detained a minor, searched his belongings, and physically assaulted him. I'm sure your department has policy. It's about documenting such encounters, especially when they involve use of force against juveniles." Officer Martinez didn't like being lectured about police procedure by a civilian, even one in military uniform. "Listen here, lady. Your boy was acting suspicious, walking through this neighborhood like he owned the place. We had every right to question him." "Walking through the neighborhood where he lives makes him suspicious?" Patricia asked incredulously. "The neighborhood where his neighbors can vouch for him? Where he's lived for 8 years? Anyone can claim to live somewhere. Officer Reynolds said stubbornly. Patricia pulled out her phone. Then let's clear this up right now. I'll call his school and have them confirm he was at basketball practice today. I'll show you his report cards and school ID. I'll provide utility bills with our address. Whatever documentation you need to verify that my son was telling you the truth from the beginning. The officers exchanged glances. They had painted themselves into a corner with their accusations and aggressive behavior. Any reasonable investigation would prove that Damon had been honest about everything, which would make their treatment of him look even more unjustified. We don't need you to call anyone, Officer Martinez said quickly. This situation is under control. Under control? Patricia repeated, her voice rising slightly. You have my minor child pressed against a wall after striking him in the face, and you call that under control? Your son needs to learn some respect, Officer Reynolds said, stepping closer to Patricia in what was clearly meant as an intimidating gesture. It was a mistake that would prove costly. Patricia had dealt with actual threats from actual enemies in actual war zones. A middle-aged police officer trying to use his physical presence to intimidate her was almost laughable if it weren't so infuriating. And you need to learn some accountability, Patricia replied, not backing down an inch. You've assaulted a minor based on racial profiling, and now you're threatening his mother for asking reasonable questions. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. Officer Reynolds was not accustomed to having his authority questioned, especially by someone he viewed as just another civilian. He failed to recognize the steel in Patricia's eyes or the coiled strength in her stance. Maybe you need the same lesson we gave your smart-mouthed kid, he said, raising his hand in a threatening gesture. It was the moment everything changed. Patricia's military training took over, and Officer Reynolds was about to learn exactly what happened when someone threatened a soldier's child. The moment Officer Reynolds raised his hand toward Patricia, time seemed to slow down. Years of combat training and protective instincts collided in a perfect storm of controlled fury. Patricia had been taught to neutralize threats efficiently and effectively, and right now, these two officers represented a clear danger to both her and her son. Patricia's response was swift, precise, and absolutely devastating. As Officer Reynolds' hand came toward her, Patricia smoothly stepped to the side and caught his wrist in a grip that immediately sent shooting pain up his arm. Before he could react, she twisted his arm behind his back and applied pressure to a nerve point that dropped him to his knees in seconds. Officer Martinez reached for his radio, but Patricia was already moving. She released Reynolds and spun toward Martinez, using a simple but effective defensive technique to knock the radio from his hand. A follow-up move sent Martinez stumbling backward, off balance and completely unprepared for what was happening. What the hell? Reynolds gasped. Trying to get back to his feet, Patricia allowed him to stand. But the moment he moved aggressively toward her again, she demonstrated why Army hand-to-hand combat training was considered among the best in the world. A controlled strike to his solar plexus left him gasping for air, while a leg sweep sent him back to the ground. Officer Martinez made the mistake of trying to grab Patricia from behind. She sensed his approach without even turning around, stepped to the side and used his own momentum to send him tumbling past her into the brick wall. Not hard enough to cause serious injury, but certainly hard enough to get his attention. The entire encounter lasted less than 15 seconds. Both officers found themselves on the ground, completely outmaneuvered by someone they had dismissed as just another upset parent. Patricia stood calmly above them, not even breathing hard from the brief physical confrontation. "Mom," Damon called out, finally turning away from the wall where he had been ordered to stay. "Stay right there." "Honey," Patricia instructed, her voice gentle when speaking to her son but still carrying an edge of authority. "Let me finish handling this situation." The neighbors who had been watching from a distance moved closer, many of them applauding Patricia's actions. Mrs. Chen continued recording with her phone, making sure every moment was documented. Mr. Williams was openly grinning, clearly proud of how Patricia had defended her family. Officer Reynolds struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "You just assaulted 2 police officers. You're going to prison." Patricia looked at him with the calm confidence of someone who had faced much worse threats than 2 incompetent small-town cops. "Actually, I defended myself and my minor child from assault by 2 individuals who were clearly exceeding their authority. We are the authority here," Officer Martinez shouted, also getting back to his feet. "You were," Patricia corrected him. until you decided to abuse that authority. The moment you struck my son without justification, you stopped being peace officers and became assailants. Officer Reynolds was fumbling for his handcuffs, clearly intending to arrest Patricia despite the fact that she had only defended herself. "You're under arrest for assaulting police officers. I wouldn't recommend that course of action," Patricia said calmly. "And why not?" Reynolds sneered. Patricia's smile was cold and professional. "Because Sergeant First Class Patricia Johnson, United States Army, has certain legal protections when defending her family from unlawful assault. Because every moment of this encounter has been recorded by multiple witnesses, and because your own body, cameras will show that you struck a minor without justification before threatening his mother." The mention of her military rank and the implications of what the video evidence would show caused both officers to pause. They were beginning to realize that they had made a series of very serious mistakes. Furthermore, Patricia continued, "I suspect your department has policies about de-escalation and community relations that you've violated tonight. Striking a teenager for being articulate and respectful is not standard police procedure in any jurisdiction I'm aware of." Officer Martinez was looking around nervously at all the neighbors who were still watching and recording. "This is all a big misunderstanding. We were just doing our job." "Your job is to protect and serve the community," Patricia replied, "not to profile teenagers walking home from school activities, not to assault minors for asking reasonable questions, and certainly not to threaten their parents when those parents seek accountability." Damon approached his mother cautiously, still shocked by everything that had happened. "Mom, are you okay?" Patricia put a protective arm around her son's shoulders, noting again the red mark on his cheek where Officer Reynolds had struck him. The sight renewed her anger, but she kept her emotions controlled. "I'm fine, baby. Are you hurt anywhere else?" "No, ma'am, just my face where he hit me." Patricia turned back to the officers, who were now looking decidedly uncomfortable. The dynamic had completely shifted, and they were no longer in control of the situation. "Here's what's going to happen," Patricia announced with the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders that were followed without question. "You're going to apologize to my son for the excessive force and harassment. You're going to document this encounter accurately in your reports, and you're going to recommend that your department review its procedures for interacting with juveniles." "We don't take orders from civilians," Officer Reynolds said stubbornly, though his voice lacked the confidence it had held earlier. "Then you'll take recommendations from a fellow public servant who has sworn the same oath to protect and defend that you supposedly took," Patricia replied. "Because at the end of the day, we're all here to serve the same community." The sound of additional sirens could be heard in the distance. Someone had obviously called for backup, which meant more officers would be arriving soon. Patricia wasn't concerned about their arrival, but she wanted to make sure the situation was properly documented before things became more complicated. "Damon, I want you to tell me exactly what happened from the beginning," Patricia said, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Don't leave out any details." As Damon recounted the entire encounter from the initial stop through the physical assault, Patricia listened carefully. Her son's version matched what the neighbors had told her and what she had observed herself. These officers had clearly overstepped their bounds multiple times. The backup units were getting closer, and Patricia knew that the next few minutes would be crucial in determining how this situation resolved. She had defended her family successfully, but now she needed to make sure that justice was properly served and that both she and Damon would be protected from any retaliation. Officer Reynolds was already reaching for his radio, probably planning to spin the story in a way that made him and his partner look like victims rather than aggressors. Patricia smiled grimly, knowing that the truth had a way of coming out, especially when it was captured on multiple cameras and witnessed by an entire neighborhood. The real reckoning was just beginning. The wail of sirens grew louder as 3 additional patrol cars raced toward the scene. Patricia remained calm, keeping one protective arm around Damon while mentally preparing for the next phase of this confrontation. She knew that the arriving officers would initially side with their colleagues, but she also knew that the truth had a way of prevailing when properly documented. The first backup unit screeched to a halt, and 2 officers jumped out with their hands already moving toward their weapons. The scene they encountered was not what they had expected based on the radio calls. Instead of finding their fellow officers in control of a dangerous situation, They saw Reynolds and Martinez looking disheveled and defensive, while a woman in army uniform stood calmly with her son. "What's the situation here?" demanded Sergeant Foster, the senior officer among the new arrivals. Officer Reynolds immediately launched into his version of events. "This woman assaulted us when we were trying to question a suspicious individual. She needs to be arrested immediately." Patricia stepped forward, her military bearing evident in every movement. "Sergeant Foster, I'm Sergeant First Class Patricia Johnson, United States Army. I'd like to report that these officers assaulted my minor son and then threatened me when I sought accountability for their actions." Sergeant Foster looked between the two versions of events, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back while we sort this out." "Of course," Patricia replied professionally. "But I'd like to point out that this entire encounter has been recorded by multiple witnesses, including body cameras that I assume your officers are wearing." The mention of video evidence caused Sergeant Foster to pause. He glanced around at the gathered neighbors, many of whom were still holding up their phones. Mrs. Chen waved her device and called out, "I got everything on video, starting from when they slapped that boy."
"Slapped?"
Sergeant Foster asked, looking more concerned. Damon spoke up for the first time since the backup arrived. "Yes, sir. Officer Reynolds hit me across the face when I told him I wasn't a punk. I was just trying to explain that I'm a student." Sergeant Foster looked at the red mark still visible on Damon's cheek, then at Officer Reynolds. "Is that true?" "The kid was being disrespectful and needed to be corrected," Reynolds said defensively. "By striking him?" Sergeant Foster's tone had shifted noticeably. Patricia could see that the senior officer was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Body cameras and civilian recordings would tell the real story, and it was becoming clear that story would not favor Reynolds and Martinez. "Sergeant Foster," Patricia said respectfully, "I'd like to request that the body camera footage be preserved immediately, along with the civilian recordings. I believe they'll show that my son was cooperative and respectful throughout this encounter, and that excessive force was used without justification. Ma'am, I can assure you that all evidence will be properly preserved and reviewed," Sergeant Foster replied. His tone suggested that he was already distancing himself from his colleagues' actions. Mr. Williams stepped forward from the crowd of neighbors. "Sergeant, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years. Damon and his mother are good people. That boy has never caused trouble for anyone. What these officers did tonight was completely wrong." More neighbors began speaking up, each one vouching for Damon's character and describing what they had witnessed. The overwhelming support from the community made it clear that this was not a case of a problematic teenager finally getting caught, but rather a case of racial profiling gone wrong. Officer Martinez tried to salvage the situation. "Look, maybe things got a little heated, but we were just doing our job. This neighborhood has had some break-ins lately, and we were being cautious." Patricia's eyes flashed. "Being cautious doesn't involve striking teenagers or threatening their parents. And I'd be interested to see the crime statistics you're referencing, because this is one of the safest neighborhoods in the city." Sergeant Foster was looking more uncomfortable by the minute. "Officers Reynolds and Martinez, I need you both to return to the station immediately. You'll be relieved of duty pending a full investigation." "You can't be serious," Reynolds protested. "We were assaulted by this woman." "After you struck her son and threatened her," Sergeant Foster pointed out. "And frankly, looking at you two compared to her, I'm more interested in how she managed to defend herself so effectively." Patricia allowed herself a small smile. "Army combatives training, Sergeant. It's quite comprehensive." The crowd of neighbors chuckled appreciatively, and even some of the backup officers looked impressed. It was becoming clear that Patricia had not only been justified in her actions, but had shown remarkable restraint given the circumstances. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come to the station to give a statement," Sergeant Foster said. "Of course. I'd also like to file formal complaints against both officers for excessive force, harassment, and violation of my son's civil rights. That's your right. And I'll make sure you're connected with the appropriate personnel to handle those complaints." As the situation wound down, Officer Reynolds made one last attempt to assert his authority. "This isn't over. We know where you live now." The implicit threat hung in the air for a moment before Patricia responded with ice-cold calm. "Yes, you do know where we live. In the neighborhood where we've been respected members of the community for 8 years. Surrounded by neighbors who witnessed your misconduct tonight. with video evidence of everything that happened. Please, by all means, make this a bigger issue than it already is. Sergeant Foster shot Reynolds a warning look. That's enough. Both of you in your vehicles back to the station now. As the disgraced officers were driven away, the neighbors began to disperse, but not before each one stopped to check on Damon and express their support for the family. Mrs. Chen promised to send her video to Patricia's phone. Mr. Williams offered to testify if needed. Mrs. Patterson brought over an ice pack for Damon's swollen cheek, Mom, Damon said quietly as they walked toward their house. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. Patricia pulled her son close. You did everything right, baby. You stayed calm. You were respectful and you didn't escalate the situation. I'm proud of how you handled yourself. But they hit me anyway, Damon said, still processing the injustice of it all. Yes, they did. And that was wrong and illegal, and they're going to face consequences for it. But you survived and you maintained your dignity. And that's what matters most. Over the following weeks, the incident sparked important conversations throughout the community and the police department. The body camera footage confirmed every detail of Patricia and Damon's account, leading to suspensions for both officers and mandatory retraining. For the entire force, Patricia's military commander commended her for the restraint and professionalism she had shown while protecting her family. The incident report noted that she had used minimal necessary force and had acted within her rights as both a parent and a soldier. Damon returned to school and basketball practice, but the experience had changed him. He was more aware now of the challenges he might face simply because of his appearance, but he was also more confident knowing that his mother would always have his back. The community rallied around the family, with many neighbors expressing gratitude that Patricia had stood up not just for her own son, but for the principle that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity and respect by those sworn to protect them. 6 months later, when Damon received his college scholarship offer, the same neighbors who had witnessed that terrible night gathered to celebrate his success. It was a reminder that while individual acts of prejudice and abuse of power could be devastating, communities that stood together could overcome injustice and create positive change. Patricia kept the medal she received from her commanding officer for her actions that night on her dresser, not as a symbol of conflict, but as a reminder that sometimes protecting the people you love requires courage, training, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right, regardless of the consequences.